welcome to My Turn Podcast, a gaming podcast hosted by extra competitive siblings. Expect recommendations, reviews, laughs and arguments as we take on games across all genres and platforms. My name's Jem, I'm the eldest sibling, and I'm joined by my middle sibling, Tim.
Hello!
Hi, Tim.
Hi, Jem.
It's a Jem and Tim special today because Erin is doing stuff, other work. Just not being cool, not hanging out with us. I don't know.
Definitely not being cool. We know that for a fact.
Always uncool is Erin.
Yeah.
So we've got quite a special episode for you today. What we normally do is we each take on a game, whether it be a video game or a board game or a street game, any kind of game. And we will review and recommend it for you. And we kind of take turns sort of interviewing each other. But today, we've got two games for you that we've both played. So we're going to have a bit more of a chat and a bit more of a deep dive into these games and their thematic link. Would that be fair to say, Tim?
There is indeed a thematic link. And there's also, I would say, a link between the way both of these game studios approached making their game as well. It's not just the thematic. They took similar approaches to the way they wanted to make it.
All right. Well, I'm full of suspense. What are the two games we're going to be discussing, Tim?
We are going to be doing the recently released Psychonauts 2, sequel to Psychonauts, and Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, which sounds like it's a sequel because it's got a colon in it, but it's actually not.
No, but there is a second one coming down the pipeline quite soon, I think.
There is. They knew.
They knew it would be a series, yeah. Amazing. So what we're going to do, these games do have a thematic link. What is that link, Tim?
Mental health, mental illness, neurodiversity, psychosis, that sort of thing.
Joy! But it is actually not doom and gloom. If you haven't played these games, stick with us on this. What we're going to do is we're going to take quite a deep dive into the games, but we'll let you know at a point if we get to spoilers. We'll let you know where to skip over. So you can listen to this safely until we announce spoilers if we get to that point. And we're going to talk about, I think, Hellblade first. What do you reckon, Tim?
Okay, can do indeed. What I can tell you about Hellblade in a nutshell is it's an action-adventure game developed and published by Ninja Theory, who are a British video game studio. And this one was actually released in 2017 on Windows, PlayStation 4. A little bit later, the following year on Xbox One, Nintendo Switch in 2019, and Xbox Series X and S August 2021, and there was even a virtual reality support version that came out in 2018.
So basically this is one of those games that is now on all the things.
Yeah, all the things. And it described itself as like an independent AAA title. Yes. So I think it started quite small and then has just sort of grown and grown.
Yeah, so from what I've read, there was a team of 20 developers that worked on this game, but with the ambition of a AAA studio, if you will. And I think that they're kind of putting that forward as a sort of manifesto for the way they want to create games in the future and sort of inspiring other indie studios to have that breadth of ambition, I guess, with making games, but while keeping the sort of integrity of the indie way of working. So not being led by the consumer, really exploring interesting, diverse themes, making sure your teams are, representative of the culture that you're working in and everything like that. So
one example I read that I'll share of how they tried to achieve this through saving money, being a small company, is that instead of going into a studio to do their normal sort of video capture, motion capture, acting stuff, they just used the boardroom in their office. They just kitted it out as being, able to do green screen in there, and like all their props and stuff were IKEA. They really did it on a budget. But hey, it works great.
It really does. So this game, in terms of genres, it's listed as a puzzle video game, a fighting game, an action adventure game, an indie game, a hack and slash, and an adventure.
I think I would probably agree with all of those, and I'd add in horror. I don't think they specifically mention horror, but there's a lot of psychological horror elements to it as well that I would throw in.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. And everything about this game, even if you want to like go on the website, everything's sort of age protected as well, and I think rightly so. This is definitely a game for adults, I'd say.
Yeah. Shall I give them a bit of story?
Yeah, let's do it.
Say where we are with this.
Yeah.
Okay, so it is a dark fantasy world, but it is very inspired by its setting, which is 8th century Orkney. Now, Orkney is Scotland, so we have Celtic culture, but it's also very much Norse. So we have Norse mythology. I mean, let's not forget Orkney from 8th century for 500 years was actually Viking ruled, and it's closer to Oslo in Norway than it is to London. So, we've got a lot of mix of Viking stuff. So we follow the character called Senua, who is a picked warrior who is trying to make her way to Helheim by defeating, all these otherworldly creatures, entities, spirits, and facing the challenges that they put before her in order to rescue the soul of her dead lover from the goddess Hela. Quick thing about the character's name, Senua. She's actually based on an Iceni queen, who is actually kind of southern England. Iceni queen Boudica. And her name, yes, based on Boudica, like kind of in terms of character and physicality, but the name comes from Senuna, who is a Celtic goddess that was only rediscovered in 2002.
What?
And we thought her name was Senuna, but it's actually Senua.
There we go.
It was first, sorry, the other way around. It was her. They thought her name was Senua. It's actually Senuna.
Okay, right. But Senua is they've taken that from that discovery. Gotcha. So, what you mentioned Helheim, Tim. What is that?
Oh, well, Helheim is like the underworld, like the Norse underworld that she has to journey into, a bit like maybe Dante's Inferno. Think of that, but Viking-y.
Yeah. And I kind of written some little talking points about this, actually starting with the opening, because when I first played this game has had a lot of buzz, which we'll come to later on in our chat. But from the opening, this game is definitely setting itself out to be something quite different as an experience. I don't know if you recall the way it opens, Tim, where you basically just are in a canoe, or I don't know if that's the appropriate word for it. Was it a canoe? A wooden kayak thing?
As far as I remember, it's a canoe because it's got one
paddle.
That's
what I thought as well. And you're just instantly immersed into this misty, dark, watery realm, and all you're doing is you're kind of going with your character Senua along this journey, paddling to somewhere you do not know yet, but you know that it's sort of got this sense of foreboding. The atmosphere's all there. The credits are outstanding. So as the game starts, you get kind of start credits come onto the screen, almost like you might do in a film, in a cinematic picture. And so you're just instantly immersed into how this looks, how this sounds. The sound of the paddle on the water is so mesmerizing. And you get an immediate sense of dread with the mist and this kind of, you know you're going somewhere already. So as a player, that choice to go one way or the other is taken away from you straight away, because you know you can only really go in one direction right from the get-go, which I think is an interesting way of immersing you into what follows. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I think it's such a clever opening because there's no heads-up displays on anything. It's full screen, so you are fully immersed in it. That's obviously a very conscious decision for them to try and make you empathize more deeply with Senua as you go. But not only does it sort of not have that to immerse you, it introduces one of the key components of the game, which is that you are guided by this voice, or the darkness, or the furies as it is, and they, sort of what you think is they're going to give you hints of where to go. And they're sort of your tutorial. You're going to listen to these voices. They would be your tutorial. But one of the main points of the game is that they are so unreliable.
Yeah.
They're like the unreliable narrator in the story. They're your unreliable guide. They, ward you off things when maybe it's something you are actually meant to do. They encourage you to something that might put you in danger. They speak simultaneously about your hopes and fears. And, what it's trying to do is give you, obviously, that sense of the character's mind, but also a really interesting game mechanic.
Yeah, 100%. And the voices that Tim's talking about have been produced with binaural audio design. So basically, it's a simulated three-dimensional sound. So the game does recommend right at the start that you play with headphones on. And the one thing that every time I told someone I was playing this, they kept saying, "Oh, make sure you've got good enough headphones." And I'm like, why are you judging my headphones? Like basically people kept saying, "Yeah, your headphones are fine, but get better ones." And I'm like, okay. It's just really
so good. Just to clarify, binaural is when you like left and right ears equally.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Sim,
sorry about that. I had to get
you do
out.
tickle me, Sim. You are funny. But yeah, this kind of constant chatter, it escalates and then calms and escalates and calms, but never really goes away through the entire game. Mm-hmm. And someone that I was messaging while I was playing this game, who'd already played it, actually told me that they had to stop playing because they'd had like some kind of very brief childhood psychosis with voices. That didn't persist throughout their life. It was just something that they remember, and the game just sort of triggered a bit of trauma. So it's really interesting because this is something, again, that it sort of warns you of at the start of the game, that this is mimicking a form of psychosis, and it has real effects on some people. And I don't know how you found it, Tim. How did it make you feel having the constant chatter of voices?
I mean, honestly, I wasn't unnerved by it. I didn't have those kinds of strong reactions. I found it very interesting more than anything. For me, I felt a little bit more of an observer in the situation. I was fascinated to know, what she would be thinking, what their agenda was, trying to sort of figure out how much of this story is realistically going on in a real woman's mind versus a fantastical, creation of mythology. So for me, it was very interesting. I didn't find it disturbing, but I think it's definitely worth saying at that point that this isn't a feeling that the game creators have just invented. They did consult very closely with neuroscientists, with mental health specialists, people who actually suffer from the condition themselves. So to my inexperienced mind, it does have that feel of authenticity, but I suppose that's a double-edged sword because I can totally also see how it would be too close for some people to be able to enjoy.
Yeah, 100%. And then for myself, I had another reaction completely, which is that I found it very calming. And I'm someone with a very busy mind, so my mind is always racing. I have occasionally suffered with quite severe anxiety, and one of the sort of symptoms of that is having this sort of racing mind where your internal voices just go, 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 and you can't focus on one thing. So having these voices in my head with the headphones on actually was very calming for me. Maybe I've never heard voices that aren't my own, if that makes sense. So it's not quite the same, but there was something about the busyness and the fact that my brain was occupied all of the time while playing this game that really settled me. So yeah, that is such a diversity of experience with this one design idea.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we know from lots of studies that, video games can help alleviate symptoms of anxiety and depression disorders. And a lot of that is to do, with distraction, with being able to solve something and having a sense of achievement or socializing if that's the context you're doing in it. So it's not that the game needs to specifically try and tackle any mental health issue, but just games in general can actually be very good for you.
Yeah, and I just think it's so interesting that by attempting to kind of pull out and find creative ways of expressing something that some people go through, that we as players all get this more unique experience of playing a game, and that won't be a one size fits all experience. So it's really interesting kind of dual result of something they've tried to do to express a different mental state. So I just find it fascinating.
And I want to say one more thing about it, but this is a spoiler.
Should we save a spoiler till a bit later? Can you put a pin in it?
I can if you want. It's because it relates specifically to the way they portray psychosis.
Oh, I've put a note at the end to let's come back to it.
All right. Can we talk then about, so the voices get very panicky when Senua takes damage.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is a spoiler because it happens very early on, but there's a sort of a mechanic in it that's where your arm gets like all dark and infected and withered or something, and they tell you at the beginning, the more times you sort of, inverted quotes, die or get damaged, more of this sort of disease will take over you, and eventually you'll hit a point where you get permadeath.
Yeah.
And it gives you this feeling of like, okay, so if I hit that, what does that mean? Like, game over? I have to start all over again?
Yeah.
And the panicky voices when you get, more and more damage, that was the thing that made me probably most anxious about the game.
Yeah, me too. So what I called it, Tim? The Black Arm of Doom.
Yeah, makes sense.
So Senua's arm, it gets a kind of black sort of diseased appearance, a bit zombified, I'd say, and that does increase. And you're right, the voices are like, oh, it's growing, it's increasing, oh no, it's going higher up her arm, and they're just constantly chatting about how bad it's getting every time you hurt yourself. And I was the same, and I'm sorry, I had to look it up. I was like, does it end? Does it delete my game? And luckily I didn't see a spoiler when I did that. But, very real threat and very real kind of jeopardy, I guess, introduced really early on in the game. Because apart from that, you're not... Although there is ways of failing in the game, like, kinda, you're always on a forward trajectory. So I guess having the Black Arm of Doom gives you a bit more of an immediate threat and a bit more sort of gameplay threat rather than this kind of mental experience of trauma. So it's kind of more gamified, I would say, in terms of the way it made me feel. Yeah, gamified, but also gives you that physical manifestation of a constant sort of threat and paranoia. Yeah.
In addition to all the things that are going on outside that, that you might be seeing, there's something in you as well that's kind of creepy.
Yeah, so let's get into the actual gameplay and the kind of game that we're experiencing while we're playing Senua. And as we explained, it's got a multi-genre listing. Do you want to talk about some of the types of gameplay that you encounter in this, Tim?
Okay, I guess for me, this is where it starts to fall down a little bit. I'll say that ahead of time, because we've gushed about the atmosphere and the voices and the starting and all this sort of stuff. But it's the point where you actually have to kind of start fighting monsters that you realise that actually your ability to really sort of plan combat or tactics or even have any sort of variety in fighting style is not going to be as extensively researched as the atmosphere was.
Yeah.
So hack and slash pretty much sums it up for most of the fighting. What did you think?
Yeah, same. So basically, everything that you fight, you are a warrior, so you would expect some fighting. When you do fight, you meet these enemies who always have masked features, so they kind of have animal skull type masks on, very unhuman, and you quickly realise you're always seeing the same ones every time there's a combat phase, and it is very much, as you said, a hack and slash style combat phase, which means that you just get overcome by wave upon wave of enemies, and they're all the same enemies that just sort of repeat on a loop, and it's very boring in my opinion. Partly because there seems to be no real leveling up or sort of character progression with any of the combat. So whereas everything else in the game, in terms of the narrative, the atmosphere, the puzzles, which I think we should talk about next, there does seem to be a lovely evolution, and you feel like what you're doing and learning as a player has an impact. Whereas with the combat, it is literally copy and paste every time. And I don't know if you remember, Tim, but when I got to the end, which is there's excessive amounts of combat as you go through it. I remember messaging you and saying, I can't use my hands. I've got a hand spasm because the actions were so repetitive that my thumbs swelled up and I literally had a hand spasm.
Yeah, I do remember. I think you say it's about the progression, because often in those sorts of games, you're allowed to specialise in something that suits the way you like to play, and there just isn't that. But the puzzles, we should come on to, they were a bit more enjoyable.
Yeah, they were.
There are quite a lot of puzzles which made sense in terms of the narrative for me, which were about illusion and perspective.
Yeah.
So having to, go through gates in the right order or line things up to initiate some sort of response. I enjoyed those ones, not just purely from a mechanical puzzle solving sort of thing, but also I think because it just made a lot of sense in terms of the narrative.
Yeah, I absolutely.
What did you like about the puzzles?
I absolutely loved the idea of playing with perspective, which happens a few times in different settings and in slightly different ways. And there's a sequence nearer the end of the game. Again, there's not really a spoiler because you meet these kinds of puzzles early on. But there's a sequence towards the end of the game which plays with perspectives and, kind of changing one thing to influence your access into another. And I really enjoyed that. And I did find figuring them out really satisfying. They weren't really challenging, but they were challenging enough because of the setting and the fact that you had to sort of try things a few times in order to figure out the pattern or the sequences. I really enjoyed that, and I think that the styling of the puzzles was very cool. One of the earlier perception puzzles that you meet is in a really cool landscape, which is this conjunction between sort of myth and history, and I really love that they've weaved that into everything. So you've got this setting of a real place, but it has this sort of mythical skin on it, if that makes sense. And I love the sort of almost set design of these things. Just really, really, really cool stuff. And if you like puzzles, I think that you will find them satisfying enough, even though they're not the bulk of the gameplay.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, sometimes if you have to do a puzzle against the clock, it can be really frustrating if it's something that your cursor has to line up to, for example, especially if you're playing with a pad. But actually, I quite enjoyed it in this game because the controls weren't so sensitive that becomes an issue, and because the puzzles weren't particularly hard sometimes, the ones that were against a clock whereby things are going to burn down around you, for example, I think there's one, that gave me enough drive to sort of care more about it. So I actually thought in this scenario it worked quite well.
Yeah, and the other thing which I think is going to feed into the horror genre, which I'd like to mention about the gameplay, was that some of the setups, they weren't really a puzzle, but there was a skill in kind of escaping or transversing a location. And there was, what I really liked again with the sound is that they made it more than just an experiential thing. They made it part of the gameplay. So there is a sequence where sound is your way through a section, which was very tense and scary.
Yeah, it really is. There were like quite a few moments, that actually make you yelp, where things are sort of crashing their way towards you and you just want to get out.
Is there anything else you want to mention about the gameplay before we maybe get into some spoilers?
I don't think so. Only because it feels like two completely different reviews in a way for me to talk about the story and the feel versus the mechanics of the gameplay. Only I suppose that I really hope that it's something for the sequel they pay a lot more attention to.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think we're both recommending this game. We'll give a proper recommendation at the end, but if you're going to take a break for spoilers, I will put the time in the show notes. So do not listen beyond this point until the next time in the show notes, which will be there, if you don't want to hear any spoilers for Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. All right, Tim, it's off. Gloves are off. Spoilers. Let's go.
Come on, tell me. Give me some spoilers. Which ones do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so just picking up on this use of sound for some of the kind of, getting through the zone. That horror sequence where you have to follow a bell and then follow water and then get a light and find some kind of torch to light, and there's these weird horrible monsters in the dark. I almost couldn't play it. I was so scared.
Yeah, it's one of those ones that you think, oh, I'll save that for the morning. I'll go to bed now and I'll leave that bit for the morning.
and I kept, because also the one thing that probably we should have said, which we haven't yet, is that the kind of when you do die and respawn, sometimes you do have to do quite a considerable section again. And in this area, I kept misstepping and getting caught by the weird monsters that are attracted to sound. And I just was not happy. I might have thrown my controller at one point because I had to keep redoing it. But that said, I really enjoyed it.
I get less shouty and throwy, and I more just hold my breath for the entire experience. That's my test, and then by the end of it, I realise I've gone past.
Yeah, and another thing, spoiler wise, again, I hope you're not listening to this if you haven't played it, but the ending, goodness me, I was fighting for, I want to say 45 minutes. That's why I couldn't use my hands the next day before I realised I needed to let myself die.
Yeah. It's one of those things that you're like, oh, I hate that, but I also kind of love it. As a decision, kind of having to let go to an extent, and there's a lot of things about choosing your fate and what's being given to you. The thing I really did like about the end, I think, which was going to pick up on this sort of assessment of psychosis, is that I think through, particularly through the beginning of the game, you can get a feeling that it's something that was like inherent to her, or just sort of suddenly her brain became psychotic. And I think the way they unfold the story of her being, isolated and abused when she was young by her father, this is the main point of it, because quite often the illness of psychosis comes from the problems with psychosis, rather, doesn't come from the initial illness so much as the stigma and the isolation and the mistreatment that comes with it.
Yeah.
Like, people can, be treated for psychosis, but obviously if they go through all that trauma on top of it, that's what makes it really, especially difficult. So that's what I was just going to pick up on, is the fact that I like that the end story sort of justified the way her psychosis was portrayed.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a really nice way of layering up that story as well, because for us as an audience, there is still some ambiguity, as there is in real life, with what is psychosis, what is the experience for people that have it, and how can people who don't have it understand that experience. And it is so interwoven with culture and perception, that it's really nice to see it explored in a way where even the description and the explanation they give us isn't conclusive. It's a mix of things, because it isn't just one thing. And I thought that was really good. The other thing, touching on that, is the genius way that secondary characters are brought in as real life characters. So like filmed, live action, that's the word I'm looking for. Live action. Yeah. So the secondary characters are actors kind of filmed through very heavily filtered screen, I guess. Really nice effects on them in such a way that it's got splintered light, and it does fit the aesthetic of the rest of the game. And I don't think I've ever seen a game that merges that live action and animation so well.
I thought it looked brilliant, beautiful the way they did that. it did something, again, special to the empathy you have with the character and how you're able to be immersed in that. And also testament to the actors doing it as well, considering they were in a boardroom mocked up as a green studio.
Yeah, exactly. And massive shout out to like the actress who played Senua, who was never a voice actor before doing this, who's like a photographer and editor. Just amazing. And I think that something the game did so well was just lingering on all her expressions, especially towards the end, where she was kind of talking to us, to herself, to the gods, you know, really kind of close up work on her eyes, which really kind of give you a lot of empathy for her, and you really care about what happens to her towards the end when you're making these decisions, like, oh, I have to die now, oh gosh, oh no. Like, it's traumatic and liberating at the same time when you realize that's what needs to happen.
And it ends with her inviting us to explore more stories with her, even though, like we've said at the end, you die. It doesn't quite turn out that way. She sort of ends up walking off and saying, I've got more to tell. So I'm excited for the next one.
Yeah, really excited for the next one. Okay, so let's mark the end of spoilers. This is the end of spoilers. So Tim, I think we've just about got through Hellblade. Who would you recommend this game to?
I think I'll slightly flip it and say I won't recommend it to anyone who really can't handle hack and slash. It's the least enjoyable part of the game, I think. And if you are particularly, you know, if you see an adventure game and you think, I love adventure games, and then you get here and you've got to put up with that fighting mechanic, you might be like, oh, I didn't want to do this, which is a shame because the rest of it is very worth it. But I think that's the only thing I'd say. And also, obviously, be mindful of your own mental disposition. And I probably wouldn't encourage it for particularly young people. Or if you've got teenagers playing it, at least have a discussion about this first.
Yeah, I completely agree with your recommendation and your warning. And again, like we always say, please look at the age rating on these things. I hate seeing like people just ignore these age ratings, without having discussions with their young people or vulnerable people, because it happens too often. And developers put those things there for a reason. The other thing I'd say as well is that they've got the Ninja Theory website has some nice mental health resources on there and links, if any of the themes of this game resonate with you or you want to find out more, which I think is good.
Do you want to give me a rating, Jem?
I love this game, and I'm only docking it a little bit because the combat hurt my hands. So I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10.
Very nice. I had something for the same reasons. I docked it for the gameplay, but there's a lot I love about this game. But I had it down as an 8 out of 10.
Ah, very close, very close. Maybe I've been a bit cheeky with the half points. I've been doing that a lot lately.
I don't really do halves. Yeah. I think just, commit.
Is it like having a shandy?
It's like having a shandy top.
Just have a lemonade or have
half a shandy top. Did you ever work in a bar where someone asked you for like half a shandy and you had to explain to them what you can't do?
Yeah, I know. I got really angry if anyone asked for a shandy, let alone half a shandy. If someone had half a shandy, I was like, "Don't talk to me, you're dead to me." But yeah, not legal measures. So you can't.
Not a legal measure.
You can only serve half a shandy in a private club. There's a fun fact for all you bar enthusiasts out there. Talking of
Should
fun.
we go on to Yes. Now this is a very different approach to similar themes, to themes of mental health. We are on Psychonauts 2, which is a third-person platform game developed by Double Fine and published by Xbox Game Studios, and it was released in August of this year, 2021. And that was for Windows and PlayStation and Xbox. And it is coming, although no official date announced, I don't think, for Mac and Linux.
The only thing I don't think it's been linked to yet is Switch.
Yeah.
Which I think it would be really nice to play on Switch, but
I'm sure it would be. Yeah,
I think it would be really fun. Do you wanna in a nutshell blurb?
The story, a little bit of story. Yeah, okay.
Right.
So
I'm going to stick it in a walnut because a walnut looks like a brain, and this game is all about the brain.
Yes, it is. It's a good job you had half a mind to say that. So like the first game of Psychonauts, you control a character called Rasputin, and fortunately for us, because this is a platformer, he is a young acrobat. Woohoo! And he's also training to become a Psychonaut. What is a Psychonaut, you might ask? Well, I'm about to tell you, so pipe down.
All right.
They are an international task force that use their psychic abilities to try and stop other people with psychic abilities for doing bad things with them. And the story that they're going through in this sequel is that they're trying to find out who actually was behind the kidnapping of their leader. Mm-hmm. And that in turn leads to an unraveling of a mystery around the founding of the Psychonauts, and also ties in with Rasputin's own family history.
Family drama.
Drums, all around.
Very nice walnut shell.
Thank you.
So yeah, let's just get into some gameplay. My first talking point is the opening. Again, for both games, both openings I thought did an amazing job of showing you what to expect, setting the tone really clearly. And this game's opening was an absolute joy. The graphics, the design of the characters, this kind of comic book style visual explanation of Raz's history from the first game, which was 2005, so ages ago, up until the point that you find him at now, was so funny. The voiceover was brilliant. In fact, the voice acting throughout is amazing. It just launches you into the story so well that you, even if you don't know a thing about the first game, you're already invested in this sweet little character with a massive head.
He really does have a massive head.
And they joke about it all the time.
It comes at all the once. I love that. I love when, because, so often animations, cartoon characters have really disproportionate, limbs or heads or whatever, but it's all part of their world. But in this one, they're constantly like, you've got a massive head.
It's so funny. Any opportunity to get a dig at his head in this script.
No, you're right. The opening was so exciting. I was not expecting to be thrown into such kind of like active gameplay that quickly.
Yeah.
I panicked a little bit when, you're going through twisting corridors and your dimensions are changing and just like, oh, is it going to be this all the way through? Because like my heart's pounding. And then they give you a little bit of respite after that. But it was an all action opener. Like you'd get, in a film where they're like, okay, we need to hook them for the first 5 minutes and then we can explain some stuff about characters.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm glad you said that, because I felt like the whole time playing this game, in every single mindscape, in every single area, I felt like I was in a film in terms of the setup, the design, the rendering of the animation, and also the score throughout is just mind-blowingly good. And I just felt like I could be in a Pixar movie. I was going
to say Pixar, yeah. There's a lot to compare with Pixar in this, actually. Not just the animation style, but also, one of the key sort of gameplay mechanics is that in order to sort of continue understanding this mystery and what's really going on, Raz uses his sort of psychic abilities to enter the mind of someone else. And what that means is not only do you get, an inside-out sort of scenario with Pixar where you're seeing different emotions become, characters and friends or enemies, but it also means that everyone's mind has a slightly different feel to it, a different story. Yeah. And so it is like going through lots of different Pixar movies because you get everyone's different experiences and histories. It's a very clever way, I think, to set up that variety of game style.
Yeah, 100%. Well, let's talk about some of the actual game mechanics, and then after that we'll delve into some of our favourite mindscapes. So the game mechanics, I mean, as you pointed out, it's very convenient that Raz is a acrobat and he's from an acrobatic family, and the joy of the diversity of platforming that you get in this game is unreal. I just love that anything that you could possibly do as an acrobat, they'd worked it in at some point as something that you can do actively in the game. How did you find kind of operating Raz and having him as your little platforming vessel through this.
Oh yeah, it's brilliant. Like you say, there's a lot of variety of ways, from trampolining and swinging and balancing and walking on balls and flipping and gliding, and there's all sorts of things you can do. And yet his breadth of abilities sort of don't always make him so superhuman that it's very easy. Do you know how sometimes, like, certain platformers, once you start powering up, it becomes very easy to, like, jump across a whole level or something?
Yeah.
Like, that's never the case here. You're always going from one step to the next, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the gameplay and the movement design, let's say, is really integral to the settings. So depending on what area you're in, you unlock kind of different, not just abilities, but potential to use that setting. So from bouncing off of weird little mushroomy shaped bushes to swinging on some vines, blasting others, like flipping off of one thing, climbing another. Like, it's just the way that they've used the interplay between what the characters' acrobatic abilities are and the set that they give you, with the playground they give you, let's say, is really, really clever, and it keeps every sort of action that Raz can perform really lively and never gets boring, I don't think.
And should we talk about some of the psychic abilities that sort of enhance his acrobatic skills?
And none of this is a spoiler, you know.
No.
The only thing that might be a spoiler, I think, in this game is the actual mystery, so we won't talk about that yet. But
I'm still clear of that. So did you find you had, like, a particular favoured psychic ability? Because one of the things is, I think you get about a choice of 8 or something by the end when you as you go acquiring them, but you can only really equip 4 at a time. So I found that there was maybe 1 or 2 that I just always had in there, and then others that I switched out.
Yeah, I had one of my triggers. I think my right trigger was the ability that I switched. So if I was in a certain mindscape or a certain area where I needed a ability I didn't use all the time, that was my switch one. Because, as you say, it was a bit confusing and not easy in a good way to get your head around the different abilities. And I think that's the point, because they are using different parts of Raz's mind and therefore yours. But yeah, my favourite was definitely the blaster. I blasted everything.
Of course you did.
Pew, 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 pew.
I think one of the ones I used the most was the sort of the levitation skill.
Oh yeah, I used that a lot as well.
you can run around a bit faster, but also, as you upgrade it, if you knock into things, it damages them. So if you find yourself a bit crowded in, you just hit that levitation, run around quickly, and knock a few things over to give you some time to figure out what your next step is.
Yeah, and on the levitation, you're not actually floating. You're basically walking on this kind of ball. You're like on a giant beach ball, and you can upgrade it to smash into bit. Like, you can actually do a kind of ground pound with it, which is really fun.
Yes. Yeah. Although I think maybe my favourite one was the one where you get to draw a cartoon copy of yourself.
Yes! I forgot about that.
That allows you to, like, slip through a letterbox and unlock locked doors, for example, or, like, operate levers that are far away from you. But that's not the reason why. It wasn't what it can do that was my favourite. It was just the fact that it was so silly. It had a really stupid voice and followed you around and said stupid things. And it was just kind of, anyway, it made me laugh, that one.
Yeah, the little 2D Raz was like, I can get that for you. It's just so funny.
Really tickled me.
Yeah, I loved it. And I also just found something really satisfying in the kind of the mind, I forgot what it's called, like the mental connections one. Just because you could kind of zoom from one thought to another through the air if you saw these little icons. Just found that quite satisfying, just flying around.
Yeah. So the idea with mental connections is that you're meant to be, kind of connecting, like traveling along neurons and connecting ideas together within someone's mind. And what that can do is actually enable new thought processes in someone's mind. So what they're doing is trying to kind of show you how thought patterns can be cemented and about how they can be broken, which might be something you'd learn in cognitive behavioral therapy, for example. But I love that they introduced it by showing it being done in a sort of inadvertently abusive way. And they had that conversation straight away. So, his teacher is like, well, doing that without permission is a violation. Yeah. And you go, oh, okay, that's where we're at with this standard. I'm not just going to be able to jump into people's minds and mess them up whenever I feel like it. They hit that responsibility really hard.
Yeah. Well, let's get into some of these mind... What are they called again? My brain just went dead suddenly. Mindscapes, that's it. Oh, gosh, I've even got it in front of me. I couldn't read anymore. I need a big head like Raz to keep all my thoughts in it. So some of those mindscapes were so inventive. And as you say, each mind had a very different feel to it, which was really nice. And each mind had its own defenses, which tied into that person's experience of mental health or their experience of processing thoughts. And so each mind you went into was a character that you'd met as a 3D character in the world, either in the motherlode or around the setting, and then you got the opportunity to see what the inside of them looked like, which is just so cool. I loved it. What were some of your favourite ones, Tim?
Oh gosh, it's so hard to pick a favourite because I just love them all. But I think maybe the one I laughed the most at might have been the 90s cooking show.
Oh yeah.
So amazing. It's kind of like, imagine a sort of Ready Steady Cook setup, that kind of vibe, and you're being asked to collect some ingredients, cook them, prepare them. Maybe it's a bit like that cooking game as well, that I've forgotten the name of, but you know what I mean.
You mean the one that's on like Switch?
Overcooked.
Yeah,
Overcooked.
Yeah.
That's it. That would drive me mad. So it's a bit like that, as go and get the ingredients, cook them, bring them back. Except that it's all in this really like monstrously garish, oversized cooking show. The judges are these hand puppets that are slightly insane, and the audience, the entire studio audience, are the ingredients, like the vegetables and the meat that you have to cook.
Yeah.
And they're really happy about it. They're very enthusiastic. They're like, pick me. And you have to like collect a carrot and then chop its head off and, and then stick it in a blender and do all these sorts of things. It just tickled me.
It was so
silly.
funny. And in that bit, when you pick up an ingredient, the carrot next to it, if you pick up a carrot, the carrot next to it will be like, that's my cousin. It's just... It's so funny. And I think, that's something we'll keep picking up on as we talk about this game, because the script is amazing, even to the point that, these background characters, just background dialogue is hilarious. And they just haven't missed a trick, have they? You're just...
No. They take every single joke. I was laughing all the way through this game, just constantly.
So funny.
Another one that... I really enjoyed was the rock concert.
Yes, that was
one
my
that you
favourite.
Go to. Okay, well, you talk about that one then.
So there's a point where you find a brain that doesn't have an owner, and I'm not going to spoil it for you and tell you whose brain it is. But when you go into this brain, you're immersed into this kind of psychedelic. What's that Beatles?
Sgt. Pepper.
Right, that kind of vibe, like Woodstock almost, but with that kind of aesthetic, that sort of Sgt. Pepper aesthetic. It's really cool. As we've already mentioned, the music's really on point. The characters that you meet are amazing, and the key voice actor in that sequence, none other than Jack Black. So it's really, really fun, and so many sort of music puns. And you meet band members who kind of look like musical instruments. It's really, really fun. And the whole thing is just so unlike any other game I've ever played. That level was mind-blowingly good.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was one of the trickier ones to navigate.
Yeah.
I think there's something about, because you have to direct sort of light through prisms to create bridges between gaps. There's something about any level that has a rainbow road that automatically becomes harder.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely. I thought that as well, and there was a lot more jeopardy of like falling off things in that level as well. But what I really liked about that mindscape was the little mini map, because within that mind you had a various locations to get across to find things, and you have a little mini map with like a little tour van that goes in between the levels, which was a lot like the cooking game Overcooked, where you have a little car that goes round. It was just so cute, and it's only it's only a few moments of gameplay that you get to experience it, but it was just so joyful, and I found that.
Do you remember what the camper van was called?
No, I don't. Remind me.
It's called the Feel-mobile.
The Feel-mobile. So good. So good.
It's part of the trouble with reviewing this game is it's so detailed you can't remember half of it. There's so much going on.
Yeah, at one point there was a squirrel that I met in the circusy area. What was his name? Sir Nutsalot or something. Just the detail
like
of
that.
what his name was so funny. And you met him for a second.
And there was another animal friend called Mrs. Thatcher. So this is the section that I laughed so hard I had to walk away. This is when one of the sort of trainee psychonauts has had a task to go and make pancakes. Oh, yeah. And she's making them in the forest with like acorns and dung and stuff, with the help of these forest creatures who are clearly terrified of her. And that's where we met Mr. Nutsalot and Mrs. Thatcher.
So funny. So, yeah, I mean, look, if you like structured, interwoven, seamlessly humour, I said that in a really weird order, humour interwoven seamlessly into your games, this is a game for you. My other favourite section was involved giant bowling balls. And
that was my other one.
Oh my goodness. Again, so this is another example of a way you can play with perspective in a game really creatively, because up isn't always up in this game, and it happens in a few mindscapes, but in the bowling ball one in particular, I mean, you're rolling and you can't stop yourself a lot of the time, and your brain has got to keep up with where the course is going. Just so clever, so inventive. More Jeopardy.
They see me rolling. It's a little bit of an homage to Super Monkey Ball.
Yes, I thought so.
Yeah. There are like homages to other games, I think, peppered throughout this game, and it's no bad thing at all. In many ways, they often improve on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, up isn't always up is a metaphor for life, I find. Jen.
Yeah, well, quite. And again, ties back into this theme of one person's mental health is very different to another. And my dog is...
Yeah. Making noises.
Making zombie noises. Oh, God. I'm so sorry, listeners. My dog's got kennel cough. Like, he's fine, but he makes that noise sometimes, and it's horrible. Mm-hmm. And this game is just genius, with also having little micro levels within levels. So platforming inside a book. I mean, who'd have thought it? Like a letter being a course that you have to get across. Just so clever. It just keeps surprising you. Any other standouts, Tim, or do you want to move to any spoilers?
Well, I think I just want to talk a little bit more maybe about kind of their approach to mental health, because it's very different to, Hellblade. Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, it's hilarious. But that doesn't mean that they don't treat it with empathy. I think they actually do a really good job of kind of treading that fine line between showing how people can, how people's behaviours can be informed by, trauma or isolation or anxiety or addiction, or stress or those sorts of things, and them just being quirky. I think that's kind of one of the delightful things about it, is when you're not in their mind, when you meet them, you just think these are quirky characters, and that's where most platformers end. But because you get to explore their histories and how their brains are now wired and why, it actually takes it that level deeper in a way that, even though it's hilarious and silly, actually makes you care a lot more about who these characters are, which I think is so clever.
Yeah, and I think that the two characters that really sort of have that experience with, well, we have that experience with them. God, I'm saying everything backwards today. Like Ford Crawler and Maligula, when you start to get into their minds, like Ford Crawler is a character from the first game that he's got a shattered personality, and we know that from the get-go. Once you get into his mind and why he's shattered, once you sort of unlock more about Maligula and her story, and she's the sort of posited as the main antagonistic force, but once you get into her story as well, it really does show you this sort of multifaceted experience to one, like creating a mind, or what makes a mind, which I think is exactly what you're saying.
And that's it. Even though there are boss fights throughout the platformer, the triumph is never, hooray, I've defeated the boss and now they're dead. What you're fighting are, their inner demons in a lot of kind of quite literal ways. But you come out the other side usually kind of in a better position with them, or understanding more about them. And I think it's nice that you can still have those big boss fights and do that sort of stuff, but have a slightly different feel to it. And maybe that's partly as well. Like, I know that this company also, when I said at the beginning they had similar approaches to making their games, they also consulted with professional mental health organisations before they started production as well. And I see a lot of those little notes kind of throughout it, even where like Raz always asks permission before he enters someone's mind, and that's like it's a life or death situation. Things like that, I feel that's the sort of stuff that you talk about before you start making the game, and you know why.
Yeah, and do you feel like you could play this game and just ignore all of that stuff, or do you feel like it's integral to gameplay?
Do you mean you could play it and ignore the mental health messages? Oh, 100%. Yeah. In a way that, I would not recommend Hellblade to younger people. I would absolutely say any young person can play this, because if you don't have any specific experience of, of these traumas or stresses or whatever, you will just accept them as quirky characters like you would get in any other cartoon. It's just that they've added more depth for people who want to look for it. But, oh, no, absolutely not. I would happily let any person play this.
Yeah, I agree as well. I was just interested on your thoughts in it, because I feel like it's sort of backgroundy, but in a good way, because what it does add, as you said, is layers and context for everything, which I think when you're looking at character creation in games, just uplifts everything and adds, like, it's like a bonus, isn't it? But it isn't integral to the gameplay, but it does give us really inventive ways into these mindscapes and settings, and gives us really, really creative ways of getting past things and facing obstructing forces and stuff. It's just so fun. Do you want to move on to any spoilers?
I mean, I don't know if I have a need to talk about any spoilers.
I kind of want to talk about a couple.
You do.
Yeah. So this is your spoiler warning for Psychonauts 2. I'll put in the show notes when you can join us again safely. Spoilers, stop listening now if you don't want the spoilers. So for me, I really wanted to talk about Elijah Wood.
Who doesn't want to talk about Elijah Wood?
So obviously he plays Nick the mailroom guy, who is also Bristol Mallet.
Can we give him his full name? Nick John Smith.
Nick John Smith.
If ever there was a sign that this guy isn't what he appears to be, it's because his name's Nick John Smith.
I thought that this was such a lovely twist to the mystery, and also a testament to the excellent storytelling. That's something that seems just sort of nothing at the beginning. Oh, you're an apprentice to a really naff person working here, the mailroom guy, ends up being the solution to the mystery, which is this person is the mole because they're not who they say they are. I just thought it just tied the story together so beautifully, which is why I wanted to talk about it. So satisfying, and also Elijah Wood's evil mode is so funny.
I just loved that you got a Disneyland style sort of ride through his history and the reason why he is his character, and it's like the naffest construction.
So
I mean,
funny.
the game designs it really well, but it's just like, of all the mindscapes, this is the one that looked like it was built on a budget.
Yeah, it's a small world DIY, isn't it? It's so funny, and this kind of like egomaniac's brain that you kind of take this literally a little like It's a Small World ride through is so fun to explore. It's just joyful. It's just amazing. So yeah, I really wanted to mention that, and also tying into something you said earlier, which is about finding reasons why some of the characters behave in negative ways, particularly with Maligula, who's posited as the sort of baddie. When you find out that Maligula is part of what he thought was his grandmother, I think it really cleverly brings in this sort of discussion of nature versus nurture, of who are you if you think you're someone and you've lived that truth, but then you find out you started as someone else. Like, who are you still? And I think they handle that really well, and they handle the truth of a bond between two people or a person and a family really beautifully. It's like, this person is still their nonna, even though she didn't start with that history. I just thought that was so heartwarming and beautiful.
It was like so much of it was very sweet. The family dynamics were really heartfelt, quite sad, but in a nice redeeming way eventually.
Yeah.
The fact that the Acrobat family were also really funny.
Yeah, they were amazing. Oh, the little side missions are a joy. So just let's cut this spoiler section down, so no more spoilers. I want to move straight on to recommendations. Who would you recommend this to, Tim?
Everyone.
Yeah.
I can't think of an exception for this. I don't know who wouldn't like this game.
I too would recommend it to everyone, and particularly if you love platformers. I think that if you're someone who really enjoyed Mario Odyssey, for example, and the way that they played around with the different types of level design, you will love this. I think this is actually even better than Mario Odyssey, actually. And also, I'm going to make a recommendation of how to play it. Normally, I would not be a completionist and say, do all the side missions, do all the collectibles. But in this game, I think that the collectibles are so joyful. The fact that you get to help out emotional baggage, for example. And the reward music of reuniting emotional baggage with its baggage tag, for example, is just so satisfying. And all the little side missions with Raz's family and some of the other characters, everything's rewarding and fun. So I would recommend that you play all of the game and everything the game gives you, because when it's over, you're like, I still want to play it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I had something like 98% of all the game completion by the time I got to the end, as opposed to like completing stuff afterwards, because like you say, like there's so many little moments and great side quests you just want to go and do.
Yeah, and going back into people's brains once you've unlocked abilities is great. And what would you rate this out of 10, Tim?
I don't know if I've given this before, but for me it's a 10.
Me too.
Yeah,
Full house.
I just love
Full
it
house.
so much.
I don't think I've given a game a 10 out of 10 since maybe the first year of the podcast, but I think I gave one of the Telltale games 10 out of 10. But yeah, I mean, what's not to like?
What's not to like? Exactly. Yeah, I don't think I've given one either, but I was like, no, I can't take any points off for anything. I'm definitely going to play it again in like a couple of years' time.
Yeah, I'd love to have another run at it. It's so funny. I hope they I mean, it's quite a new game still, so there might be DLC. I'd love that. If they add another Mindscape, I'd love it. So well done to the team, because that is a full house from us. So, any last thoughts about mental health in games, Tim, following our in-depth reviews of both of these games?
I suppose only that, as I said, studies kind of show that it can be really good no matter what game you play. It doesn't have to be themed on mental health. but also that I know there's a lot of really promising work going on in VR to cope specifically with trauma, to help people relive those situations in a safe environment. I think we've only scratched the surface of how gaming and gameplay and storytelling that's immersive can actually help people with things like this.
Yeah, a really nice note to end on. And all I'd say as well is that I know there's a lot of people who feel like when something is about mental health, there's a certain element of being tokenistic because the world wants to talk about this stuff now. But I really want to dispel that and say, you know, be open-minded if you see that something is around the subjects of mental health, because as you've seen with what we're talking about, they can be handled in really different ways. And I really applaud games developers for going into these realms of games design, because it just opens stuff up to stories we haven't seen before and ways of exploring stories we haven't seen before. So that's why I think this kind of diversity is good.
Sorry, it just made me want to say, it just made me want to exclaim, we've had enough angry men avenging their dead wives.
Yeah.
We've had enough of those. Other stories.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we highly recommend both these games, obviously. So go check them out and let us know your thoughts as well. We are on the socials. Find us at My Turn Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And if you haven't done already, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on wherever you listen to your podcast. We are on all the things. Please like and recommend us to your friends and contacts. It really helps us out. And all I need to say now, Tim, is thank you very much for joining me. I've had loads of fun talking about these games. And, I almost forgot. Tim's reminded me by doing a gesture. We do end our podcast with Tim's Tasty Tipples. Tim's drink pairing recommendations for both these games. Let's start with Hellblade.
Oh, I was actually just going to tell you I was off for a drink. All right, Hellblade. Well, it has to be a dram of Highland Park, which is a whiskey made in Orkney, because that's where it's set. They are, in fact, only one of two whiskey distilleries in the Orkneys. They are in Kirkwall, and they have been distilling there since 1798.
Ooh. Is that one of the ones you've been to?
Albeit illegally. No, I've never been to the Orkneys. I would love to go. I would love to go up to the Orkneys. No, in terms of Scottish Islands, Skye and Arran, that's all I've been up to.
So Tim will shortly be posting a GoFundMe for his trip to the Orkneys to visit this brewery.
If we could do that, that would be great. And they're, like I say, they're very Viking-y in Orkney. So they're named after kind of Viking things. So the 10-year-old is called Viking Scars. 12-year-old is Viking Honour. 15 year is Viking Heart, and 18 is Viking Pride. So decide whether you are scarred or prideful, I guess.
Nice. And what would be your drinks pairing for Psychonauts 2?
Well, I had to go very much on gut feeling rather than place setting for this one. I've gone for absinthe.
Okay.
And that is because I feel like the game has a real bohemian style, first of all. And, you know, and we're not quite sure what parts of Europe it's set in, but it's somewhere. Somewhere. And also, absinthe has that reputation that it causes hallucinations and delusions and things, you know, that come out of the mind. Just to let you know, that is not true. You will not hallucinate on absinthe. It comes from the idea that it contains something called thujone, which is in wormwood. But if you were to have enough thujone to make you hallucinate, you'd die of alcohol poisoning first. So you're not going to get it from absinthe.
Yeah. The other thing about absinthe is it's often green. And the game has a lot of green in it. So I felt like that. When you said absinthe, I was like, yeah, it's a good colour. It's a good colour for the game.
It is indeed green from all the herbs, and you know when you first pour it, it's like this emerald green. But if you get what is thought of as a good absinthe, so that means it's got fennel and star anise in it. When you pour water into it, because you should always dilute absinthe, when you pour water into it, it goes a milky green, a pale milky green, and that is called louche. Louche, which is a word I love.
Or pastel green to the commoner.
No, not the colour, the actual absinthe. It's louching. So when you add water to absinthe and it changes colour, that's louche. That's louche.
Wait, is that the same as when you add water to Rocker? Is that also louche?
Yes.
Okay, I learnt something today.
Yeah, but you only get it with like the French one that adds Felon Star Anise. If you go for the Bohemian one, it doesn't have it in, so it doesn't.
Well, I don't have any absinthe, but next time I do, I'm going to try this. Okay, and now it's time to say goodbye. Thank you very much, Tim's Tasty Tipples. Woo.
You're welcome.
And thank you very much for listening to our episode. We will catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.